The days after the big meeting felt different for Michael and for the whole lakeside neighborhood. For the first time since he had moved in, Michael woke up without that heavy feeling in his chest. He looked out at the water, at the sun lighting up the trees, and he felt hope growing inside him. Neighbors he had only waved to before now stopped to chat, and people who had once seemed distant now greeted him with warm smiles. It was as if the walls that had separated everyone were finally coming down. The HOA board, after all the commotion, had no choice but to drop the violation notices against Michael. They also stopped sending out new fines or warnings, at least for a while. The board even sent him a polite letter, saying they would like to meet and discuss the use of the clubhouse land. For the first time, Michael felt like they were willing to talk as equals. When the day for the meeting came, Michael walked to the clubhouse with his papers and a hopeful heart. He met Mrs. Granger and 2 other board members at a big table by the window. Sunlight poured in, and the room felt open, almost like a new beginning. Michael spoke honestly. I want this community to be fair for everyone. I don't want anyone else to feel afraid or like their voice doesn't matter. Willing to let the clubhouse stay where it is, as long as the board promises to listen to all the neighbors, not just a few. The board members listened quietly. Mrs. Granger looked tired but nodded. Things got out of hand. I suppose we did not listen enough. Maybe we were too quick to send notices. For the first time, she seemed more like a neighbor than an authority. After some back and forth, they agreed to write new rules, together rules that were clear, fair, and would be approved by a vote of all the residents, not just the board. Michael asked for open meetings, a chance for everyone to speak, and fair warning before any action was taken against someone's home. The board agreed. They even suggested creating a group of regular homeowners to help guide decisions. So power was more balanced. Word spread about the agreement. Neighbors were relieved. Many who had felt powerless before now spoke up, sharing their ideas for making the community a better place. Some wanted more flowers and shared gardens. Others wanted a monthly potluck dinner in the clubhouse, so everyone could get to know each other better. Michael saw friendships forming where there had only been suspicion. He saw the Carters, who had once been quiet and nervous, planting sunflowers with kids from 2 doors down. He saw Sam and his wife laughing with the new family who moved in across the street. The lake, which once felt like a barrier, now became a place for everyone to gather, as the new rules took shape. The neighborhood held its first open election for HOA board members. Some of the old board members, including Mrs. Granger, chose to step down and let others take their place. Michael was nominated, but he politely refused, saying he wanted to enjoy his porch and the peace he'd worked so hard to earn. Instead, he volunteered to help with community projects, like fixing the dock and painting benches. Life began to feel normal again, only better. There were fewer arguments and more laughter. People helped each other with repairs, shared garden tools, and even started a small book exchange by the lakeshore. When someone faced a problem, others were quick to offer advice or lend a hand. One sunny afternoon, the neighborhood threw a big barbecue by the water. Michael made his famous lemonade, and Sam brought his grilled corn. Kids played tag and older. Folks sat in a circle, sharing stories. Michael looked around at all the smiling faces and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time, it truly felt like a community, a place where everyone belonged. Mrs. Granger, now just a regular neighbor, came over with a plate of homemade cookies. "You were right, Michael," she said quietly. "We needed a change. Thank you for not giving up on us." Michael shook her hand and smiled. "We all want the same thing: good home and good neighbors." The changes lasted. The clubhouse was used more often than ever for parties, meetings, and even quiet afternoons with a book. People respected each other's property, and when issues did come up, they were solved together. The fear of getting a sudden notice or a fine faded away, replaced by a sense of trust. For Michael, his cabin became even more special. He started inviting neighbors for coffee on his porch in the mornings. Sometimes he would take his fishing pole and share stories with the children who were curious about the lake. He helped start a garden club, planting flowers and vegetables. Along the walking path, he even built a little lending library for everyone to use. The peace that Michael had searched for when he first bought his cabin was finally real, not just for him, like for everyone who called the lakeside home. When he thought back on the months of stress and struggle, he felt grateful he hadn't given up. He knew the journey had been hard, but he also saw the good that had come from standing up for what was right. One evening, as the sun was setting, an orange and purple over the water, Michael sat quietly on his porch. He watched as families walked by, laughing together. He saw Mrs. Carter with a basket of fresh tomatoes and Sam waving from his boat. Michael realized something important. Sometimes, one person's courage can make life better for everyone. He thought about the signs he had painted, and the long meetings with the board. He remembered the lonely nights when he wondered if he had made a mistake. But now, he knew he had done the right thing. He had not only saved his cabin, he had helped his neighbors find their voices. Together, they had made the lakeside a kinder, more welcoming place. As the stars appeared and the crickets began to sing, Michael felt content. The cabin was peaceful, the lake was calm, and the community was strong. He smiled, knowing that sometimes a small act like putting up a simple sign can start something truly wonderful.
And for Michael, that was the real victory, not just
winning his own fight, but helping everyone around him feel at home. Michael woke up the morning after getting the deed with a new sense of calm. The sun was shining through the pines, the lake sparkled, and the air felt fresh in a way it hadn't for weeks. Michael made himself breakfast and sat on the porch. Thinking about what to do next, he was holding something big in ownership of the land under the clubhouse. But more than that, he was holding a chance to bring change. He decided he would act with kindness, but also with firmness. He did not want to use his new position to be mean. Instead, he wanted everyone to understand what it felt like to be ignored and treated unfairly. Michael carefully wrote a letter to the HOA board. He explained that, according to the land records and the new deed, he now owned the land beneath the clubhouse. He attached copies of all the legal documents and invited the board to discuss things together before the next community meeting. He waited 2 days, but the board did not reply. The silence was loud. Michael realized that if he wanted the message to be heard, he would need to make a bigger statement, one that could not be swept aside or ignored, no matter who was in charge. Early one Saturday morning, when the lake was still and the birds were just starting to chirp, Michael drove his pickup truck to the clubhouse. He carried wooden signs he had painted by hand. Each sign read, HOA'S, a trespasser private property, nitrogen monoxide. He placed one on each side of the clubhouse lawn and another at the entrance to the parking lot. He made sure they were clear, neat, and respectful. Michael didn't want to embarrass anyone. He just wanted to be seen and heard. The signs caused a stir by noon. People coming for yoga classes or to pick up the community newsletter stopped and stared. Some laughed in surprise, out their phones to snap photos. The story spread quickly, faster than Michael could have imagined. By lunchtime, almost everyone around the lake had heard about the signs, and a few had driven by just to see them for themselves. Sam was the first neighbor to stop by Michael's porch, shaking his head with a big grin. "You really did it," he said. "I never thought I'd see the day." "I had to," Michael said quietly. No one should feel powerless in their own home. Soon, Mrs. Carter and her husband joined them, carrying a plate of cookies. "You're braver than all of us," she told Michael. "We're proud of you." But not everyone was happy. Within an hour, Mrs. Granger arrived at Michael's cabin, walking quickly and looking flustered. She asked Michael to take the signs down immediately, saying they were damaging the reputation of the community. Michael remained calm and polite. He showed her the deed and explained that the signs were on his land. He was simply asking for a conversation, just as he had tried many times before. Mrs. Granger became frustrated. "This is outrageous," she said. "You can't do this." "I can, Mrs. Granger," Michael replied. "And I want to do it the right way. But you and the board have ignored me for too long." That afternoon, the board sent Michael an official letter, threatening him with legal action for disturbing community order. Michael read it carefully, then took all his documents, deed, emails, notices, and even pictures of his flower. Bedin called a local attorney, just to be sure he was acting within his rights. The attorney listened, reviewed the papers, and smiled. "You're on solid ground, Michael. You have the right to put up those signs. If the HOA wants to use the clubhouse, they'll have to talk to you now." Word spread quickly, and the story caught the attention of a local newspaper reporter. One morning, a friendly young woman named Lisa showed up on Michael's porch. She asked questions, took pictures, and listened as Michael described everything from the first violation. Notice, too, the moment he received the deed. She talked to neighbors, too, hearing about the other times the HOA had ignored people's voices. Within days, the story was published online and in the weekend paper. The headline read, "Local man turns tables on HOA, community rallies behind him." People in nearby towns started talking. Some even sent Michael encouraging messages, sharing their own HOA struggles. The attention made the board uncomfortable. At the next HOA meeting, more people than ever showed up. The clubhouse was so crowded that some neighbors had to stand outside the doors. Michael arrived early with his documents, feeling nervous but hopeful. The meeting started with the usual business, but quickly turned to the sign situation. Mrs. Granger looked serious as she explained the board's view. Then Michael stood up and faced the crowd. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was clear. "I didn't want any of this," Michael began. "All I wanted was to fix my porch and plant some flowers. But when I tried to talk to the board, I was ignored. When I asked for a fair hearing, I was pushed aside. So I decided to stand up for myself and for everyone who's felt powerless here." He showed the deed and explained how he got it, step by step. He said he wanted the clubhouse to remain for everyone's use, but things needed to change. "We all deserve respect, fairness, and a voice in what happens to our homes," Michael said, his voice steady. People in the room started nodding. Some clapped quietly. For the first time, Michael saw hope and pride on the faces of his neighbors. One board member, Mr. Jenkins, stood up. "Maybe it's time to rethink how we do things," he said. "We can't ignore our neighbors. We should listen." Mrs. Granger tried to regain control, but the room had shifted. People began asking questions, sharing stories, and demanding more openness from the board. Some suggested new elections or changing the rules to make things fairer for everyone. After the meeting, many neighbors came up to Michael, shaking his hand or giving him a pat on the back. "You've changed everything," one woman said. Michael smiled, grateful but humble. "I just did what I thought was right," he replied. That evening, Michael took down most of the signs, leaving just one at the clubhouse entrance as a reminder. The board sent him a letter agreeing to negotiate. Michael replied, asking for open discussions and a chance for everyone's voice to be heard. Over the next few weeks, the community began to heal. People felt less afraid to speak up. The board met with Michael and other residents to discuss fair rules, better communication, and ways to make the neighborhood friendlier. Michael insisted that all decisions be made in the open, with votes from the entire community. It was not an easy process, but Michael saw real change happening. Neighbors who used to be quiet or fearful now greeted him with smiles. The air around the lake felt lighter, as if a long, heavy cloud had finally lifted. Michael realized that standing up for yourself could also mean standing up for others, and sometimes even small acts of courage could help a whole community find its voice. At sunset, Michael sat on his porch and watched the colors dance across the lake. He felt tired, but satisfied. He knew the journey wasn't over, but he had started something good. He hoped the lesson would last, that kindness and courage, mixed with patience and truth, could bring even the most divided neighborhood back together again. Michael was not someone who gave up easily. As more days passed, his determination only grew stronger. He knew something was not right about how the HOA was handling things. It wasn't just about him or his flower bed or the bird feeder. It was about fairness for everyone living around the lake. One morning, as Michael sipped his coffee and looked out at the shining water, he thought, if the rules don't make sense, maybe there's something deeper going on. He felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. He wondered who really owned the different pieces of land in the community and how the HOA had become so powerful. That thought planted a new seed in his mind, a seed of investigation. Michael decided to start with the basics. He walked over to the small town hall, a friendly building with white pillars and big windows. The clerk, Mrs. Daniels, was happy to see him. She knew Michael from church and remembered his helpful ways. "Mrs. Daniels, could you help me look up some land records?" Michael asked politely. "Of course, Michael," she replied, pulling out a large leather-bound book and turning on her old computer. "I want to see who owns which parts of the lake property, especially the clubhouse area," Michael said. They spent to keep his request casual. They spent the morning digging through old maps, dusty papers, and digital files. The process was slow, but Mrs. Daniels enjoyed the company. She poured them both a cup of tea as they read through the documents. Finally, she found a file that seemed important. "This is interesting," Mrs. Daniels said, tapping her finger on the screen. "It looks like the land under the HOA clubhouse was never transferred to the HOA. It's still listed under the original developer's company, Lakeview Ventures." Michael felt his heart race a little. He remembered hearing about Mr. Franklin, the developer who built most of the cabins and the clubhouse 25 years ago. The name on the record matched his memory, Roger Franklin. Mrs. Daniels looked puzzled. That land should have been transferred to the HOA long ago, but there's no record of it. Michael thanked Mrs. Daniels for her help and left the town hall with a copy of the land record in his hand. He walked home, thinking hard. If the HOA didn't actually own the land their clubhouse sat on, what did that mean for all their meetings and decisions? Michael wanted to be sure he understood everything, so he called an old friend named George, who had been a surveyor before he retired. George knew about land boundaries, maps, and property law. Michael explained the situation over the phone. "George, can you come out and take a look with me? I think there's something strange about the clubhouse land." George was happy to help. He arrived the next morning, wearing his old surveyor's vest and a big smile. Together, the two men walked around the clubhouse with a copy of the survey map. George measured distances and checked boundary markers. They found the old iron pin that marked the edge of the original developer's land. "Michael, you might be onto something," George said as he scribbled notes. "The boundary runs right through the center of the clubhouse. The HOA doesn't own it, at least not legally. I checked with the Franklin family to see what happened." Michael felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. He wondered how the HOA would react if they learned the truth. He decided to do one more thing: reach out to the Franklin family. After some searching online and a few phone calls, he finally found Roger Franklin's son David, who now lived in another state. David remembered Michael from years ago. He talked on the phone about the old days, the lake, and how much the community had changed. Michael carefully explained the situation with the HOA and the land records. David was surprised. He had no idea the land was still in his family's name. "My father passed away a few years ago," David said quietly. "But I remember you. Helped us clean out the cabin when he got sick. You were always kind to him, Michael." Michael felt a wave of gratitude. "I just want things to be fair for everyone here. The HOA is using the clubhouse land, but they don't own it." David paused for a moment, thinking, "You know what, Michael? My father always wanted that community to be a place where people helped each other. If you want the land, I'll sign it over to you for $1. Consider it a thank you for your kindness years ago." Michael was shocked, but grateful. "Thank you, David. I promise to use this for good, not for trouble." They agreed to the transfer, and soon the paperwork was done. Michael visited Mrs. A. Daniels at the town hall one more time, and she helped him file the new deed. The land under the clubhouse now legally belonged to Michael. He sat on his porch that night, watching the stars twinkle above the lake, holding the official papers in his hands. He couldn't believe what he had discovered. The next day, he told a few trusted neighbors what had happened. Sam's eyes widened. "You mean the HOA's clubhouse is on your land now?" Michael nodded. "That's what the records say." "Have the deed." Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. People who had felt powerless for years now felt a glimmer of hope. Michael understood the responsibility this gave him. He didn't want to use his new power to punish anyone. He wanted to use it to make things right. He spent the evening thinking about how best to handle the situation. He thought about all the times he'd tried to talk to the HOA board and how he'd been ignored. He remembered Mrs. Granger shutting the door and the board members refusing to listen at meetings. This time, he wanted everyone to see the truth in a way they couldn't ignore. Michael didn't rush. He made sure everything was legal and clear. He talked to George again, and even called a local attorney, just to be safe. He wanted to be respectful, but firm. This wasn't about getting revenge. It was about standing up. For himself and everyone else who just wanted to enjoy their home by the lake. When the day finally came to reveal what he'd learned, Michael felt calm and ready. He knew this was his chance to change things for the better, not just for him, but for the whole community. He took a deep breath, looked out at the peaceful water, and felt a quiet strength growing inside him. For the first time in weeks, Michael didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like someone who could make a real difference. With the official deed in hand, he prepared for the next step. It would show the HOA that the real power in a community came not from fear or rules, but from honesty, fairness, and standing together as neighbors. After that uncomfortable HOA meeting, Michael felt lost, but not defeated. He sat on his porch that night, listening to the distant calls of owls and thinking deeply about his next steps. This little lakeside cabin was more than just a building. To him, it was his dream. His reward after a lifetime of honest work. He wasn't ready to give it up or let anyone make him feel unwelcome. The next morning, Michael decided to try again, this time more formally. He gathered all the papers he had collected, photos, receipts, the permit for the porch repair, and a copy of the HOA rules. He made neat copies of everything and put them in a new folder. Then he wrote a polite, clear letter addressed to the HOA president, Mrs. Granger, and the board members. In his letter, Michael explained that he truly cared about the community, respected the rules, and wanted to resolve any misunderstanding peacefully. He ended with an invitation: "Please visit my cabin, see the improvements for yourself, and let's talk this over like good neighbors." Michael sent the letter by email and dropped paper copies in the mailboxes of the HOA president and 2 board members. He hoped that by being friendly and open, he would get a friendly and open response in return. A few days passed. Michael waited, hopeful. But the only reply he got was another notice, this time not orange or red, but bright yellow. It was pinned to a small stake right in the middle of his flower bed. This one listed even more violations, including a warning that his bird feeder was attracting wildlife and that his new welcome mat was not in compliance with approved materials. Michael stared at the notice, shaking his head. In disbelief, how could a welcome mat cause trouble? Trying not to lose his temper, Michael called Mrs. Granger again. Her phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. He left a message, just like before, using calm words and explaining that he only wanted to resolve things. He even invited her to join him for coffee and talk things through. But the days went by with no answer. It wasn't just the board that ignored him. Michael noticed some neighbors looked away when they saw him coming. He saw people whispering at the mailbox or watching from their windows. He knew many residents didn't agree with the HOA's strict ways, but few were willing to say so out loud. Some were probably afraid they might be the next target if they spoke up. One afternoon, Michael was walking to the lake with his fishing pole when Sam, his neighbor across the street, waved him over. Sam spoke quietly, looking around before saying, "They did the same thing to me, you know? My wife and I tried to fight it, but they just made things harder. Best thing is to keep your head down." "But isn't that unfair?" Michael asked, feeling frustrated. Sam shrugged. "Maybe, but it's their world here. They like to remind us who's in charge." Michael realized that was the real problem. It wasn't about flowers or welcome mats. It was about power. Some people on the HOA board liked having control, and that made it difficult for others to speak up. Michael thought of the Carters and other neighbors who had faced similar troubles. The pattern was clear. Those who didn't fit in with the main social group seemed to face more problems. But Michael wasn't ready to give up, decided he needed to understand the HOA's rules better. He sat at his kitchen table that night, reading every page of the HOA guidelines, highlighting the parts about home improvements and outdoor decor. He even read the fine print about pets, plants, and what types of mailboxes were allowed. Nothing in the rules seemed to say that. Bird feeders or welcome mats were not allowed. He made a list of questions and printed out the rules to bring with him to the next HOA meeting. He wanted to be ready, not just for himself, but for the neighbors who had quietly supported him. Maybe if someone stood up, things could start to change. Before the meeting, Michael tried one more time to be friendly. He baked a batch of blueberry muffins and took them to Mrs. Granger's house. When he knocked, Mrs. Granger opened the door a crack. She looked surprised to see him and a bit uncomfortable.
Good morning.
"Mrs. Granger," Michael said with a warm smile, "I brought you some muffins. I really hope we can talk about the notices on my cabin." Mrs. Granger looked at the muffins but didn't take them. "Michael, the board's decision is final," she said quickly. "You need to correct your violations or there will be further action." Then she shut the door. Michael stood on the porch for a moment, feeling more determined than ever. He realized there was no interest in compromise. If anything, the board wanted to make him feel alone and pressured into giving up. The next HOA meeting came quickly. Michael arrived early, just as he had before. This time, he noticed even more people attending. Word had spread about the conflict, and people were curious to see what would happen. Michael took a deep breath and found a seat near the front. He placed his folder on his lap and kept his notes close. The meeting started with the usual topics: flowers for the community park, holiday decorations, the annual picnic. When the time came for community concerns, Michael stood up. "I'd like to speak about the notices I've received," he said calmly. Mrs. Granger frowned. "We've already discussed this," she said. "The board's decision stands." Michael held up the HOA rulebook. "I've read every rule, and nothing says I can't have a bird feeder or a welcome. Matt, I have permits for my porch repair and receipts for my flowers. I'm asking for fairness, not special treatment." One of the board members interrupted. "You agreed to these rules when you bought your cabin." "I did," Michael replied. "But these notices seem unfair and don't match what's written. Here, if I'm breaking a rule, please show me the exact line." The room grew quiet. Some neighbors nodded, while others looked away. Mrs. Granger glanced at her papers and quickly moved the meeting on to the next topic. After the meeting, Michael felt discouraged but also noticed something interesting. As he left the clubhouse, a few people stopped him to say thank you. Mrs. Carter squeezed his arm and whispered, "You were brave, Michael. More people agree with you than you think." Sam gave him a thumbs up as he passed by. That night, Michael sat on his porch again. He was tired, but his mind was busy. He thought about all the neighbors who felt powerless just like he did. He wondered how many people were just waiting for someone to stand up for them. Michael realized that if he didn't give up, maybe others wouldn't either. The days that followed weren't easy. More notices arrived. The board added fines for tiny things like leaving a garden hose in the yard or using a non-standard mailbox flag. But Michael kept his spirits up. He made sure to greet every neighbor with a smile. He shared extra flowers from his garden with Mrs. Carter and helped Sam fix a broken step on his porch. He found small ways to bring the community together. Started inviting neighbors over for lemonade on his porch after dinner. First only one or two came, but soon more joined. People laughed, told stories, and slowly began to talk about their own struggles with the HOA. The group grew, and Michael realized he wasn't alone. One evening, as the sun set and painted the lake with gold and orange light, Michael looked around at his new friends. For the first time since getting that orange notice, he felt hope. Maybe things wouldn't change overnight, but he knew he had started something. He was building not just a home, but a community one where everyone felt like they belonged. And as the stars appeared above the quiet lake, Michael promised himself he would keep fighting not just for his own cabin, but for every neighbor who dreamed of peace and fairness by the water. Michael had always dreamed of owning a little cabin by the lake. After many years of working as a mechanic in the city, he finally saved enough money to buy his peaceful retreat. The cabin wasn't fancy, but to Michael it was perfect. It sat on the edge of a quiet blue lake, surrounded by tall pine trees. He loved waking up early, sipping coffee on the porch, and listening to birds sing as the sun rose over the water. Michael had only lived at the lake for a few months when something happened that changed everything. One cool, misty morning, as he stepped outside to water his flower bed, he noticed a bright orange paper stuck to his front door. The paper was official looking, with bold letters at the top. Michael's heart sank before he even read the words. He took the notice off the door and read it slowly, trying to make sense of what it said. The notice was from the Homeowners Association, the HOA. It listed several things. Michael was in violation of repainting the porch, fixing broken boards, planting new flowers, and installing a small bird feeder. Michael frowned. He had done all these things himself to make the cabin feel like home. He thought he was improving the property, not breaking any rules. There was even a warning at the bottom of the notice. If he did not correct the violations, the HOA said he could be banned from using his own cabin and would have to pay fines every day. Michael felt shocked and confused. When he bought the cabin, the real estate agent gave him a thick packet of papers, including the HOA's rules. Michael remembered reading through them before signing. There was nothing about planting flowers or fixing broken porch boards. He always kept his yard tidy and never bothered anyone. Why was he in trouble now? He looked around his little property. The paint on the porch was fresh and neat. The flower bed was filled with bright yellow daffodils and pink petunias. His bird feeder swung gently in the breeze, and 2 small sparrows hopped nearby. Michael could not understand how these things could be against the rules. He decided to ask his neighbors. He walked down the path to where Mr. and Mrs. Carter lived. They were an older couple who had lived at the lake for many years. Michael showed them the notice, and Mrs. Carter shook her head sadly. "They did the same thing to us last year," she whispered, glancing around as if someone might hear. "We put up a new fence, and suddenly we were breaking the rules. The HOA likes to pick on people sometimes. Don't take it personally, Michael." Michael's neighbor across the street, Sam, was out washing his truck. Michael asked if he had ever gotten a notice like this. Sam nodded and told him he once got fined for leaving his fishing boat in the driveway for one night. "They keep a close eye on everything here," Sam said. "Some folks on the board just like feeling in charge." It seemed like everyone had a story about the HOA sending them warnings for small things. Michael felt frustrated, but he didn't want to make enemies. He decided the best thing to do was try to talk to the HOA president directly and explain his side. He looked up the HOA president's contact information, which was listed in the community newsletter. Her name was Mrs. Granger, and she lived in a big house on the hill. Co called her and left a polite message explaining that he didn't mean to break any rules. He asked her to call back so they could talk about it. He also sent a kind email with pictures of the improvements he'd made, showing that everything was neat and safe. Michael waited several days, but Mrs. Granger did not respond. Instead, another notice appeared on his door, this time in a red envelope. It said he now owed a fine for every day. The violations were not fixed. Michael felt his stomach twist in knots. How could he fix something that wasn't even a problem? He had followed the rules as far as he could tell. Worried Michael started to pay more attention to how the HOA worked. He noticed that some cabins in the neighborhood had peeling paint and overgrown grass, but those owners never seemed to get notices. People who got in trouble were usually the newer residents, or those who weren't friends with the HOA board. Michael remembered at the last neighborhood barbecue, the board members sat together, laughing and sharing stories, while others sat at a separate table. One afternoon, as Michael was walking by the lake, he heard 2 women talking on a bench. "They want Michael out," one of them said softly. "He's not part of their circle." Michael realized the problem might be about more than rules. Maybe it was about who belonged and who didn't. Still, Michael didn't want to give up. He believed in fairness and knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He collected all his receipts for the paint and porch repairs. He found the permit he'd gotten from the county to fix the porch, took photos of his yard, and printed out the HOA rules. He prepared a folder with everything, determined to prove his case. He tried again to call Mrs. Granger, but this time the phone went straight to voicemail. Michael left another kind message, asking for a meeting. He decided to go to the next HOA meeting and speak in person. When the day of the meeting came, Michael put on his nicest shirt and arrived early. The meeting was in the community clubhouse, a big wooden building near the lake. Michael sat near the front, his folder in his lap. As the meeting started, Mrs. Granger stood at the podium. She talked about new flowers for the park and thanked people for volunteering. But when Michael raised his hand to speak, she frowned. "Yes, Michael, what is it?" she asked in a sharp voice. Michael stood up and calmly explained that he loved his cabin and tried to keep it beautiful. He said he wanted to follow the rules, but the notices he received seemed unfair. His folder of receipts, photos, and the rulebook. But before he could finish, a man on the board interrupted him. "You should have read the fine print," the man said. "Everyone has to follow the rules." Mrs. Granger nodded and quickly moved on to the next topic. Michael sat down, feeling embarrassed and frustrated. Some neighbors gave him sympathetic looks, but nobody spoke up for him. After the meeting, a few people came over and quietly said they agreed with him. But they didn't want to get in trouble with the HOA. Michael walked home in the dark, feeling defeated. He stared at his cabin, wondering if he had made a mistake. Moving there, the moonlight shimmered on the lake, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. He sat on his porch and tried to think of what to do next. Michael was not the kind of man to give up easily. He decided he would keep fighting, not just for himself, but for everyone who wanted to enjoy their homes in peace. He realized this wasn't just about flowers or bird feeders. It was about standing up for what was right, Michael promised himself. That, no matter what happened, he would not be bullied or pushed out of the place he loved. And so, his battle with the HOA had truly begun.